Last week was our first playoff game, and my plaque psoriasis was so itchy under all my gear. Sometimes just thinking about scratching could take me out of the moment. And then my doctor told me I could get clearer skin with a pill called Otezla.
Otezla apremilast is a prescription medicine used to treat adult patients with plaque psoriasis for whom phototherapy or systemic therapy is appropriate. Otezla can help you get clearer skin after just 4 months.
Okay, ready for the next game. Talking to my doctor about a pill was a total game changer.
Don't use Otezla if you're allergic to it. Get medical help right away if you have trouble breathing or swallowing, swelling of the face, lips, tongue, throat, or arms. Severe diarrhea, nausea or vomiting, depression, suicidal thoughts, or weight loss can happen. Tell your doctor if any of these occur and if you have a history of depression or suicidal thoughts. Live in the moment. Ask your doctor about Otezla. Call 1-844-4-OTEZLA or visit Otezla.com for prescribing info about cost, and more.
Hi there, it's Justin. Just before we jump into today's episode, I wanted to check something really important. Are you subscribed to my Think Faith newsletter? If not, you're missing out on articles, news, events, and updates. Subscribe today and I'll send you the first chapter of my surprising rebirth book. And one more thing, with the return of season 2 of the podcast, I would really value your monthly support to help me make this podcast looking at how the tide of faith is coming back in on the West. Become a silver supporter and you'll get early access to episodes plus exclusive bonus video content. Gold supporters also get signed copies of both my books and an invitation to The Inner Circle, a monthly catch-up with me on Zoom. For the newsletter or to support, go to the links with today's episode.
That's police! What are you looking for? You're making a big mistake. And he's only a kid.
Dad, I haven't done anything.
This is the trailer for Netflix's hit show, Adolescence.
So do you think it would be okay if we speak about it? I haven't done anything. You're a good dad, a great dad.
He hasn't been found guilty, he's been accused.
The critically acclaimed drama follows the family of a teenager accused of murdering a girl under the influence of misogynist online personalities.
Banged by a girl, you sausage.
You're not getting it.
What am I not getting?
Dad, you're not reading what they're doing. It's a call to action by the manosphere. 80% of women are attracted to 20% of men. You must trick them because you'll never get them in a normal way.
We've done nothing wrong, have we? Hey!
The storyline, in which a mum and dad are simply unaware of their son's online life, alone in his room, has opened up a conversation of the effects on young men of unmitigated access to porn, social media, and toxic online influencers.
Young men are suffering. They're feeling isolated, they're grappling with their masculinity and with their broader place in society.
This is former England football manager Gareth Southgate recently delivering the 2025 Dimbleby Lecture.
As real-world communities and mentorship declines, young men end up withdrawing, reluctant to talk or express their emotions. They spend more time online searching for direction and are falling into unhealthy alternatives like gaming, gambling, and pornography. And this void is filled by a new kind of role model who do not have the best interests at heart. These are callous, manipulative, and toxic influencers whose sole drive is for their own gain. They willingly trick young men into believing that success is measured by money or dominance, never showing emotion, and that the world, including women, is against them. They are as far away as you could possibly get from the role models our young men need in their lives.
In our previous episode, looking at the rise of the so-called manosphere in response to a male identity crisis, we charted the same challenges facing young men, highlighted again in Gareth Southgate's lecture about the need for mentors to step up. But what if the male identity crisis outlined by the former football star presents, as one pundit put it, an open goal for the church to reach out to young men looking for better guidance from better role models?
Outside of the world of sport, there's not a lot of opportunity for men to be coached, to be developed, to have older men in their lives. And so what we have an army of men in churches who could be doing this.
What we used to do and call it men's ministry, that is kind of now our evangelism. What you just need to do is gather together and get real with one another and have a number of Christians who are perhaps longer in the tooth, who've been around the block a few times, who have followed Jesus and can share the deep, rich, weird wisdom of the scriptures with one another. I think that's where discipleship is really happening.
Men, like Jesus, formed in the way of Jesus, are a gift and not a threat to the world. And, I've had a few themes and emphasis on my life. To be honest with you, I've never had traction in ministry like the stuff we do with forming men.
An enormous opportunity presents itself to the church, and here's perhaps the most surprising thing of all. After generations of the emptying of churches of young people, especially young men, something is changing.
And the most rapid or most exciting change within those young people is among the young men. It has surprised us. I'm not gonna lie. It is remarkable.
Young men, it seems, are doing it for themselves. They've already begun looking for a better story about life, goals, relationships, and God. And they're showing up again in church. I'm Justin Brierley, and in this podcast series, I'm bringing you the inside account of why a meaning crisis in the modern world and the search for a better story about life are leading many 21st century people to reconsider Christian faith. Welcome back to Season 2 of the surprising rebirth of belief in God, Episode 8, Why Men Are Returning to Church.
This episode is brought to you by the Toyota Grand Highlander. From daily routines to life-changing adventures, the Toyota Grand Highlander is spacious, powerful, and ready to take on life's grand challenges. Advanced safety features and innovative technology give you confidence for whatever life throws at you. And it's available in a hybrid Nightshade Special Edition, which includes sophisticated gloss black exterior accents and 20-inch black alloy wheels. Learn more at toyota.com/Grand Highlander. Toyota, let's go places.
Anyone paying attention to the American Christian scene online can't help but notice that there has been a vocal and enthusiastic group of people converting to the faith. Nearly every month, a new video appears on YouTube that gets tens of thousands of views discussing another person's journey to Orthodox Christianity.
Well, a couple of years ago now, I started hearing from a number of my friends who are clergy about a surge of people showing up to their churches, right? And often they would say things like, "We are seeing more than we have ever seen before."
At the end of last year, several major news outlets began reporting on a story that had already been bubbling away for over a year in US Eastern Orthodox circles. Young men were entering the church in unprecedented numbers. The denomination has always been relatively small in America, largely composed of expatriate communities. Yet, a recent survey by the Orthodox Studies Institute showed a 62% increase in baptisms and chrismations when new members are welcomed into the church between 2021 to 2023, compared to the previous 3 years.
So the question I have, since you're looking at, 10 or 11 years of data, has there been some recent surge? Is that real?
This is Matthew Nami speaking to Orthodox priest Father Andrew Damick.
Absolutely, that's real. And in terms of when people were received, the surge comes in 2022-23.
Okay.
So if you compare, there's pretty much a sort of stable number of converts every year, adult converts every year, until we get to 2022, at which point it spikes. So when you compare the 2022-23 data to the data from the prior years, then what we end up with is about a 43% increase in adult converts in recent years.
This is being anecdotally said by a lot of people, is that the surge is overwhelmingly a bunch of young men. So is that true based on the data set that you're looking at?
Yes, there has been a surge in men. So single men, so unmarried men, are the largest increase. They have the largest increase.
Okay.
However, married men and married women also have a very large increase. So it's not as big as the single men increase, but it's still a very large increase. The only group that doesn't have a large increase are single women.
We'll be taking an in-depth look at the boom in young men entering the Eastern Orthodox Church in a future episode. For now, it's worth noting that this upturn is being seen in other parts of the church too. The French Catholic Church saw the largest intake of adult converts in France in living memory during its 2024 Easter Vigil. Over a third of the converts were aged 18 to 25, and many of them men. Later in the year, the New York Times reported that, for the first time, more Gen Z men are now attending church than their female counterparts in the USA. The same phenomenon has since been recorded in Australia, where 39% of Gen Z men now identify as Christian, compared to 28% of women. This demographic flip has never been seen before, yet it mirrors findings last year in Finland, which showed a more than doubling of young men in churches between 2011 to 2019. The results are being felt elsewhere in Europe too. Sweden has reported increasing numbers of young people joining both the Protestant and Catholic Church in the past couple of years. Meanwhile, statisticians in Norway have noted a similar rise in young people attending church, especially young men. Alongside this, I had been hearing an increasing number of anecdotal stories from Christian leaders across the UK seeing young men wander into church for the first time. Then Rhiannon McAleer got in touch. As Director of Research for Bible Society UK, she had been noticing data for some time that suggested a new openness to faith. But when the findings came in from a large-scale 2024 survey of church attendance across the UK, she told me that she and her team were astonished. So tell us a little bit about this new research. What were the questions you were asking? What were you hoping to find out?
Bible Society's been undertaking large population attitudinal studies for a number of years now. So we did our first one in 2018, and we asked the population of England and Wales a whole bunch of questions about how they feel about the Bible, but also their religious practice. Like, do they go to church? Do they take part in other spiritual activities? What do they think of Christians and the church at large? All these kind of things. And we have recently rerun this at scale. So the 2018 survey, we did a massive sample of 19,000 people on. And last year when we polled this again, we repeated the survey in its entirety, and we polled 13,000 people, which again is absolutely massive. So they're both really robust surveys and give us a really good picture of how attitudes and behaviours around Christianity and the Bible have changed in the last 6 years, and obviously we've got COVID in the middle, so we're really excited to see what this data was going to show for us. And one of the most exciting and surprising, I guess, in some ways, things to come out was that we saw that the church had grown. So we have more people telling us they go to church on at least a monthly basis than in 2018. And where this growth is happening is the most exciting thing. So back in 2018, under 4% of 18 to 24-year-olds were saying they were going to church at least monthly, much bigger among older age groups. So we all know that story, right? The church is getting older and declining. But today, we're seeing that 16% of 18 to 24-year-olds are telling us that they're going to church at least monthly. And the most rapid or most exciting change within those young people is among the young men. So we've seen a rise in young women saying they're going to church, and that's important to note. But for the young men, in 2018, under 4% were saying they were going to church regularly. It's now gone up to 21%, which is just massive. It has surprised us. I'm not gonna lie, and we have looked extensively into the data and tried to unpick it, see if there's a methodological reason that this might have happened. But Bible Society, like many organisations, has been hearing indications of warmth among young people for a couple of years now, and particularly young men. So this data has backed up what we were hearing on the ground anyway, which is really cool.
It's really interesting. And obviously, I've taken a personal interest in this because I've written a book and now a podcast series talking about the rebirth of belief in God. And I, like you, have picked up on lots of anecdotal stories of young men being influenced in the direction of church and faith through some online influencers that we could mention, but just a lot of pastors telling me, I've just had young guys walking into church. They want to find out more. They're picking up a Bible and so on. So I guess to some extent, does this data appear to be a kind of a bit of a kind of statistical evidence for what, as you say, people were sensing something was happening in the last couple of years?
Right, it's exactly that. And if you were to do a single survey and these results came up, you could quite reasonably question, did you have a good sample? Was there something going on with your participants? All of this kind of thing. The really interesting thing about our data sets, though, is that we have this comparison to 2018. We've also surveyed in the years in between as well, but we just didn't do the full survey, so not necessarily a pure like for like. So when you are looking at that trend data, you have to then question, why didn't we see this in 2018 if it was an issue with the sample? Or what has happened to young people to make them say they're going to church more when they didn't think they needed to say that in 2018 if they're not actually going to church? So both of these samples, because they're bigger scale, because they were conducted by YouGov, which is an extremely reliable research panel, they give us confidence in the data. So absolutely we would suggest that this is kind of the statistical backup for the anecdote that we've been hearing for some time. And it is remarkable to see it at this level of scale. But when we worked out the numbers, we did kind of see that actually, while it feels really dramatic, if you look at the number of churches over the country, you'd only need to be seeing actually a handful of people coming in to any particular congregation. So you might not necessarily notice it. And that's why we've called our report the quiet revival, because it's not a rush, it's not a flood. But overall, it is having impact on communities and certainly impact on our statistics.
The new research from Bible Society UK is a significant confirmation of the sense that I first had a few years ago that the tide was beginning to turn when it came to faith conversations in Western culture. The skepticism of the new atheists had been replaced by an openness to the value of faith and the benefits of a church tradition. In fact, whether they're going to church or not, a recent report for the Times newspaper has also revealed the growing spiritual thirst among Gen Z, those born between 1996 and 2010. Half as likely to be atheists as their parents and grandparents, they are the open generation. Yes, open to many forms of spirituality, but Christianity is increasingly an option on the table. In fact, against an otherwise stagnant book market, Bible sales have been increasing in the US and the UK, driven by Gen Z. As the Gen Z-age son of a friend of mine put it, atheism was something that your parents did. Christianity feels more edgy, more dangerous. So, I haven't been the only person noticing a steady stream of Gen Z and millennial men taking faith seriously again. Theologian Sarah Coppin encountered many skeptical young men throughout her school years in the era of New Atheism and while studying at Cambridge University, but told me the conversations she's been having with them have changed radically in recent years.
So, you know, sort of fast forward from your late teens, early 20s, then into your 30s, and now suddenly I've got all these friends, all of them male, all of them university educated, all of them had previously been quite hostile and mean, are now all quietly sort of coming out of the woodworks, asking if they can have conversations about God. And I've got 4 friends in particular who are on different stages of their journey, but I would say that if you asked them, you know, are you doubting your atheism, they would absolutely say yes. One is now actually attending church, but all 4 in some way, shape or another are turning around and saying, oh, actually, this thing isn't as dumb and stupid as I thought it was.
Would you say something's changed kind of at some level where, you know, it's not just one individual, it's 4 apparently, that's kind of allowed them to think differently about the issues?
Yeah, it's emotional, 100%. And they're all 4 from different spheres of my life. One's from way early childhood, one's a uni friend. You know, I've lived in different countries, they're from different nations, all kind of Western. It's definitely a feeling of this isn't working. Life isn't working. Some of them are really big into Jordan Peterson, and have kind of, you know, and I know on your podcast you've talked a lot about how he seems to be kind of building a bridge between faith and reason on a popular level for people, which a lot of Christians would say there wasn't a chasm in the first place, but on a popular level we felt that there was, and he seems to be building a bridge maybe halfway there, 3/4 over the way, and that just suddenly means that for a lot of people, they are, that I know at least, they are suddenly going, oh, actually, I really need something. There's a big gap in my life. I need something to fill this gap. And historically, I was told that I couldn't think about the faith, the God stuff, because that would be stupid. But now that's not stupid anymore. So now it's an option. And yeah, it's just been really interesting to have these conversations, and particularly with some of them who have openly been very hostile to me. I've had to swallow my pride a little bit and not be too smug. Again, there's only 4 men and it's all anecdotal, but I find it so interesting that all 4 of these different people are all basically saying the same thing to me, that this life isn't working. I've had free reign to do whatever I want. They're all quite privileged. You know, one's a trust fund kid. They're all well educated. They're all kind of, you know, white middle class, and they're kind of just saying, I have everything, but I have nothing, you know, and I'm miserable and I don't know why. And I think there's just something about, again, you know, I'm actually not Jordan Peterson's biggest fan for a number of reasons, but I can't fault him entirely. You know, he's quite a complicated figure, because he's opened up these conversations now with these men.
It's a bit of a jumble of an intellectual kind of thing, because I think people who do like the Jordan Peterson stuff, they're kind of intellectually tuned in. But the other thing about Jordan Peterson is I think he does appeal to the kind of the emotion and the heartfelt kind of aspect of human experience and so on. So that it sounds like that's playing an important part. This isn't just a kind of an intellectual puzzle solving problem for these folk. Is that right?
And it never will be, and it never has been for anybody. Like, no, very few people come to faith reading Thomas Aquinas, you know, weighing up the kind of pros and cons. I think just it is kind of almost like an early midlife crisis, really. I've got one friend who I've known since very early childhood who, I mean, we hadn't spoken in over a decade, and he got in touch completely out of the blue a few months ago. And we had a long talk about all sorts of things, and he's in counseling and he's going through some stuff. And I distinctly remember one of the things when we were teenagers that he used to kind of talk about, especially to boys in his class, or you know, in his teenage years, and then at uni to other men. He was really like, why would you worship a God that like won't let you have sex until marriage? Like, that is so stupid. Like, why would you do that? Like, I can't believe you'd do that. And now you fast forward and he's on all of these secular dating apps having a terrible time. And he's got some Christian colleagues that he's been talking with, and he's been asking them some quite interrogating questions about their marriages. They're all married. And he said to me, Sarah, they're all having more sex than I am.
we sort of had a bit of a laugh about it. And he was like, Sarah, like, I really thought these guys were dumb. Like, I really did. But it turns out that just the way you guys do things, and you just sort of quietly get on with it, and you took all this crap from us atheists who were, you know, piling it on, and you just sort of quietly got on with your lives and you stuck to it. And now you fast forward all these years, and I actually think you were less wrong than I thought you were.
Pastor Jon Tyson's books, Fighting Shadows and The Intentional Father, were written after seeing increasing numbers of Gen Z men turning up at his New York church looking for guidance in life. I asked what he thinks accounts for the wave of interest in faith and church.
I think a part of it is that this has some downsides too. Okay, so this is not completely neutral. But Christianity has had a high value and regard for men historically. And as our society is more and more chaotic and men sort of try and figure out who they are, when they look at who is it that values who I am, you look at the church, and the church has traditionally valued men. I think there's increasing gaps between gender's view of reality. I think some of the research bears that out. Barna did a study. Women age 18 to 30 are 30% more liberal than their male counterparts, which is 5 times wider than in 2000. So you get a real different sort of vision in reality. And I think when men look at their options of how to be men, the church, person of Jesus, some of the saints in history, there's a lot of abuses, but there are definitely some models, archetypes that men can look at and say, that there's a vision that is offered to me. I came across this other research, by the way, which I found was fascinating, that may be fueling some of it. And this was on Gen Z trends of 2024. And they go trends from 2024 through 27. And in the 2024 trends, they were talking about, I'll give you some of the titles: trad fantasies, the apparent simplicity of going back to traditional domestic lives; primal masculinity, out of the soft boy era towards an aspirational form of men returning to physical and primal habits; alpha ideals, men following raw and reinvented codes in order to attract women. One article that was put out talked about the tool belt generation, a blue collar revival. And I think part of it may be when Gen Z have been told you can be anything, there's no script or form, rebellion in a time of chaos is order. And rebellion in a time of gender neutrality is returning to traditional roles. So I think in some ways we went so far to one extreme, rebellion against traditional roles. Rebellion now is perhaps inhabiting some of those, and the church has traditionally put some of those things out. So if we can have the healthy version of this, I do think this is definitely a positive. Men, like Jesus, formed in the way of Jesus, are a gift and not a threat to the world. And in my work, I'm quite surprised that I've put this emphasis on men and fatherhood. It wasn't a stated life goal. I just saw such a pastoral need for it. And, I've had a few themes and emphasis on my life. To be honest with you, I've never had traction in ministry like the stuff we do with forming men. And I've never had a reception to any of the books I've written, like the one on Fighting Shadows and The Intentional Father. So yeah, it definitely feels like this is an area that God is highlighting, and there's a lot of restoration work to be done in this area.
Theologian and research professor Dr. Anthony Bradley told me why he thinks the vibe shift among young men looking for structure and identity is leading a number of them to Christian faith.
Young men are increasingly interested in what is it that made our civilization great in the past, and how did we get here? And in the West, you cannot have that conversation divorced from religion. It's impossible to do so. So this sort of interest in conservatism and really tradition and trying to figure out what is it that makes civilization, that provides it some meaning, has opened people up to the past. I think the other thing is that because of the ways in which the West can't define anything, we don't have strong definitions of what it means to be a human. We can't define a marriage. We can't define a child. I mean, there's so many things that just lack definition that people are searching for something to give them very clear definitions of what it means for them to exist as men. What am I here for? So it's really, and I actually love the opportunity, because now I think more so than in previous generations, young men are asking the big meta questions, the existential questions, right? We're talking about Nietzsche here. They're asking those really, really big questions. And in the West in particular, Christianity has been the answer to those questions, and it's opened them up at least to considering re-engaging with that tradition, because it's the tradition that provided the scaffolding and the structure and the building blocks that gave them the civilization in which they enjoy. And they want to go back and learn about what is it that made my country great, made the West great, made my family great. How do we get here? And that interest is taking them right back to religion broadly, and in the West, Christianity in particular. And so they're open.
I asked Jon Tyson if the church can compete with the Andrew Tate versions of masculinity that are also attracting so many.
Well, I mean, the church has two advantages over everything else, I believe. Now, this is obviously, I'm a pastor. This is my insider position. Number one, the gospel is true. This is the true story of the whole world. It's the most compelling, intellectually credible, existentially satisfying vision of reality. And so when preached properly, aligns with reality in a way that is startling, which is getting back to the premise of your book, which is kind of like, oh my gosh, this is surprising. Wow, the person of Jesus. Wow, this is surprising. Number two, the person of Jesus. The message of Christianity is Christ. And Jesus is the most compelling man who's ever lived. And when we preach Christ in all of his glory, well, as Jesus says, when I'm lifted up, I'll draw all men to myself. And so often the church has just stopped playing offense by presenting Jesus and started playing defense by reacting against all the cultural trends. And so can we compete? Well, the Bible says that of the increase of his government, there'll be no end. And, the church is doing better today than it ever has in all of human history. So I think the answer is yes. The question in the West is, can we get our messaging back to the person of Jesus and create spaces for men to learn to be disciples like Jesus? And to be honest with you, I'm very, very optimistic about this. We haven't had a real men's movement in the West in many, many years, but I do see signs that men are wanting to become like Jesus, and they're not dismissing masculinity as a part of it. So I'm quite hopeful we can compete and in some sense even win the world in love.
Did you know that leaving a rating and a review on your podcast app helps others to discover this show? Thanks to Bickwiser, who described it as something rare and precious, providing spiritually crafted brain food and a spiritual uplift. Sharing an episode with others on social media also makes a huge difference. But the way you can make the biggest difference to this show is by supporting my work, either via Patreon from anywhere in the world or through US tax-deductible giving from the USA. Either option gets you the same perks. Become a silver supporter and you'll get early access to episodes plus exclusive bonus video content. Gold supporters also get signed copies of both my books and the chance for a monthly catch-up with me on Zoom. And I get so much out of those catch-ups with supporters myself. I really love them. So to support, just go to the links with today's episode info.
This episode is brought to you by Netflix. 3 couples, 4 vacations, a lot to unpack. Watch The 4 Seasons, a new series starring comedy favorites Tina Fey, Steve Carell, Will Forte, Coleman Domingo, and more in a hilarious and heartfelt love letter to long-term relationships. Based on the original Alan Alda film. Watch The 4 Seasons, May 1st, only on Netflix.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Forget the frustration of picking commerce platforms when you switch your business to Shopify, the global commerce platform that supercharges your selling wherever you sell. With Shopify, you'll harness the same intuitive features, trusted apps, and powerful analytics used by the world's leading brands. Sign up today for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/tech, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/tech.
I remember crawling onto the summit of Everest and clearing the snow from my mask to see the curvature of the earth at the edges. But finding a simple faith that empowers my life, to me, that's been my greatest adventure. Got questions about life? Try Alpha.
This advertising campaign for the Alpha course, an introduction to Christianity run by churches, was fronted by Bear Grylls, a well-known TV adventurer who's been increasingly open about his own faith.
Some people say there's no such thing as an atheist, but we've grown more atheist in our viewpoints. It is harder to communicate if you do have a faith. Why did you say that it's a tricky thing?
So it's hard to articulate, I think, because it's personal and it's intimate, and also it's, like I say, it's has just as many doubts as it does, doubt and faith, two sides of the same coin. I think it does feel like that for me. But through it all, I would say my Christian faith has been a real backbone and a kind of secret strength in many tricky moments. Light to a dark path, I always kind of feel it's that sort of thing.
Significantly, Bear Grylls was also instrumental in the faith journey of Russell Brand last year. He assisted in baptizing him at Easter 2024. But Bear Grylls and Brand are part of a wider circle of male celebrities changing the conversation on faith. This is film star Mark Wahlberg, a committed Catholic, talking to NBC News.
What does it mean to you, your faith?
Oh, it's everything. It really has. It's afforded me so many things. Obviously, God didn't come to save the saints. He came to save the sinners. We've all had things and issues in our lives, and we want to be better versions of ourselves. And through focusing my faith, it's allowed me to do that.
Shia LaBeouf is another movie star who, after a series of personal struggles with addiction, abuse allegations, and dabbling in other religions, entered the Catholic Church in 2023. Speaking with Bishop Robert Barron, he described being introduced to a new picture of masculine strength in Christ while reading the Gospels while staying with an order of friars.
All I knew about was this very soft, meek Jesus, which didn't fit into my idea of what masculinity would be. I come from my dad was a Mongol biker, it's like it wasn't appealing to me. And then I read about John the Baptist, and it became quite appealing. The grizzle.
Yeah, right.
And then you get further into the gospel, and you start getting into elements of this redemptive. It felt like I started reading about a route. I started reading a map, towards something that felt like let go. That's really what I got out of the Gospels. If I could wrap it up in 2 words, it was let go. And at that time when I was reading it, I was holding on so tight to a life that I was slipping away through my hands, to 35 years of management, that the gospel gave me this invite to just let go. What never was appealing to me about Buddhism was this idea, if I'm in a boat and the boat is sinking and I don't know how to swim, Buddhism is a book that tells you, and read this and learn how to swim better. And at the time in my life, I didn't want to swim anymore. I had a gun on the table. I was out of here. I didn't want to be alive anymore when all of this happened, okay? Shame I had never experienced before. Kind of shame, you forget how to breathe. You don't know where to go. You can't go outside to get a taco. You don't want to go in.
That's where you are when you're up there reading the gospel and thinking about the flying pot repeal. You're in that state.
But I'm also in this deep desire to hold on.
Yeah.
And so I read the gospel with this man, Jude, and I keep hearing in many different variations of it. I'm not going to explain the whole gospel here, nor do I need to, it's you. But I keep hearing let go.
Mm-hmm. As you pray, let go was coming through.
Yeah, that's all I kept hearing.
But not just let go, but reach out, right, to someone who's reaching out to you.
The reach out had happened for me.
Yeah.
I was already there. I had nowhere to go. This was the last stop on the train. There was nowhere else to go. In every sense, it was I know now, like, my God was using my ego to draw me to him, was drawing me away from worldly desires. It was all happening simultaneously, but there would have been no impetus for me to get in the car and drive up here if I didn't think, oh, I'm gonna save my career. And what happened to me when I got here is a switch happened. It was like 3-card Monty. It was like somebody tricked me into it.
Yeah.
It felt like, not in a bad way, in a way that like I couldn't see it. I was so close to it. I couldn't see it.
The world of YouTube and podcast influencers has also tipped in the direction of men talking far more openly about faith than ever before. Alongside Christian influencers like Jonathan Pajot and Bishop Robert Barron, several mainstream video hosts have become increasingly evangelistic. Ex-Navy SEAL podcaster Sean Ryan has spoken of his conversion and recently interviewed evangelist Lee Strobel on his popular show. The king of podcasting himself, Joe Rogan, has been increasingly platforming Christian thinkers and celebrities. He began 2025 by featuring Mel Gibson talking about his faith and Bible scholar Wesley Huff defending the historicity of Scripture.
So interesting,
isn't it? So
that's so interesting. It totally makes sense too.
Yeah, so it's the levels of methodology that we can use to find internal accuracy. If we really want to figure out, okay, where was this written? And is it coming from early eyewitness testimony? We look at something like the biblical Gospels, and they fit the bill for something that's written in first century Judea.
Wow.
So we're constantly discovering ways that we can use different types of methodological analysis to figure out the historical validity of something. In all of this, what do you think of Jesus? Like, in terms of your own, like, journeying and trying to find answers to ultimate questions. What do you think of the historical person of Jesus?
Well, it certainly seems like there's a lot of people that believe that there was this very exceptional human being that existed. So the question is, what does that mean? Does it mean he was the Son of God? Does it mean he was just some completely unique human being? Is he the Son of God? Well, are we all? That's another question, right? Do we all have that inside of us? Do we all have that ability to change everything around us inside of us? Do we all have that unique connection to the divine? Just the fact that it's a question to ponder is a miracle in itself, in a way. Just the fact that there's this concept of this person that died for our sins, that's the Son of God. Like, just the concept of that is interesting to people, because what it can do to people is offer them a very unique way to change the way they feel about the world itself. And if you do follow that, I know a lot of Christians are hardcore Christians. They're some of the nicest people you'll ever meet in your life. So it does work, right? Like, if you do live like a Christian, and you do follow the principles of Christ, you will have a richer, more love-filled life. So it is true, right? But you have to submit to this concept that this guy was the child of God who came down to earth, let himself be crucified, came back from the dead, explained a bunch of stuff for people, and then said, all right, see you when I come back.
Inevitably, some of the most influential names in the world of YouTube won't mean much to the average millennial or Gen Xer, but I know for a fact that my teenage sons sit up and take notice when the world's #1 Twitch streamer, Ninja, uses a live stream to declare that Jesus is king. Or Gen Z YouTubers like George Janko or Chandler Hallow, co-star with the hugely popular Mr. Beast, are outspoken about their embrace of Christianity. Yes, there are the negative influences out there, and we know the dangers of idolizing celebrity converts, but we shouldn't underestimate the effect of a YouTuber such as Ryan Trahan, with almost 20 million teenage subscribers, talking about his recent conversion.
Haley is Christian, and when we started dating, I was not. I was atheist, cynical atheist even. Whenever I would talk to Christians, I was always very questioning their beliefs. I started dating Haley, and I would ask her questions like that, very hard questions, and I wanted to really challenge her because I loved her so much. I didn't want her to have this false view of reality. Conversation after conversation, she was very gracious with me, and She answered questions fairly logically. Like I would always like look up debates and like find.
You were trying to debate her. You're like, I'm gonna slam dunk on you.
And I would like. What I realized though is my heart yearned for an answer. Like I realized it all came from a place of like non-closure with my grandma. Of like I just really want to know. This basically culminated to this day, July 4th, 2020. This is when my YouTube channel was doing very well. I had almost 2 million subscribers. I was making more money than I ever dreamed of. I was giving it all I had. And I received everything I thought I wanted. And so on July 4th, 2020, I was with Haley, we were watching the fireworks, and I started weeping. Like I started sobbing my eyes out. And I realized it's because I felt like I hadn't felt anything for like 3 weeks. This was my finish line. All my identity is in this, and I feel nothing. Fireworks are representative of a like celebration, you know? And it was like a crazy juxtaposition of like, I should be celebrating right now. I love this girl that I'm with. I have everything I've ever wanted. Why do I feel empty? And it was crazy, dude. And I realized like, I need to go on like a spiritual pursuit. I started taking a lot less cynical approach towards asking questions, just starting to pray and starting to ask myself, like, what do I believe? And ultimately I did land on Jesus. And I started, you know, developing a relationship with God. I can't believe I'm saying that, bro, because I literally would have absolutely clowned on myself 3 years ago. Whenever I started looking at who Jesus was and like even the things he said and like the things he taught, it realized like, wow, this is so loving. And if I can potentially have a relationship with him, I'm just gonna try. And now it is my source of joy. Like it is my source of love. It is my source of everything. Because I have that, I can go out into the world and do onto others like what I feel like I already have. It's real. Like I can't lie about who I am.
Yeah.
And like I can't lie about where I get the source of joy and positivity.
Yeah.
Because it's actually like, such a disservice to, you know, people that watch.
I can't help but think that the steady stream of male celebrities and influencers finding faith or talking about it more openly and embracing a more Christ-centered vision of masculinity is having an outsized effect on the possibility of the average man being willing to walk into church. Of course, there are pitfalls. Muscular Christianity has been preached from the pulpit by some influential pastors too.
And I'll just tell you, I love you guys, and I love your wives, and I love your kids, and I love your families, but men need to stop thinking about having a good time, and they need to start thinking about leaving a good legacy. And a lot of guys are like, I just don't do responsibility. Well, then you do the demonic. Those are your choices. You do responsibility or you do the demonic.
This is Mark Driscoll, whose ministry became wildly popular in the 2000s for a confrontational approach that urged men to step up and take responsibility. But revelations of past misogyny and allegations of bullying behaviour led to the implosion of his church, Mars Hill, by 2014. You can hear more of that story in episode 29 of the first season of this podcast, including my own disagreement with the well-known pastor over his attitude towards masculine ministry. But for all his failings, I think Driscoll still got at least one thing right. He took the concerns of men and how to reach them seriously, as podcast host Parker Setikase reflects in this conversation with Pastor Paul Vanderklay. And just a warning, there's some fruity language.
Driscoll was a huge influence on my life. I was very much a product of the Young, Restless, and Reformed. And he helped me stop watching porn because he wrote this little book called Born Again Christian. And in there he says, hey, we're not animals to be dragged around by our cocks. And that changed my entire life, him saying that. Because I was like, I had this idea of Schwarzenegger, and that's who I wanted to be, just stupid, jacked. And I thought every woman would just rule over me, having no idea that's not what gets women. I wrestled because I thought I could be He-Man or something, and I realized women like tall basketball players, not freaking wrestlers. Nobody cares about wrestlers. Wasted my whole life. But realizing that was a challenge. It was an encouragement. But yeah, it was saying, look, you're not a freaking animal, dude.
Yeah, and Driscoll did that well. And the disappointment with Driscoll, well, there were a number of disappointments with Driscoll, but he obviously he needed some maturity in some areas. He didn't have it, and when push came to shove, he was squishy and he cut and ran.
Yeah.
He said, God told me to. Oh, okay. And this church that not only he invested in, but thousands of others invested in, was gone overnight. So there's rightly a scandal there. If Driscoll had, let's say, submitted to a degree of discipline, worked on some of these things, perhaps with some older men that could have said, you're clever, you're sharp, you're funny, you're inspirational, but okay, what does it mean to be a good father and a good husband when you're going to be married for decades? What does it mean to be a good pastor when you're going to be leading the church for decades?
Mm-hmm.
And there will be stumbles, there will be errors, there will be all of those things because you're a human being.
Yeah.
But, when by the time people get to my age, pastors are starting to think about, how do I finish well?
Can we still take the best of what attracted men to Mark Driscoll's ministry, the call to higher purpose and the adventure of following Christ, and present it in ways that allow both men and women to flourish? Jon Tyson thinks so.
There's multiple ways you can read the scriptures. There's obviously a sort of a biblical theology, there's systematic theology, but when you read it from a narrative perspective and you humanize the characters in it, do you think Abraham's life was boring? Like literally, God appears to you and he says, I'm going to take you on a bit of a journey where, don't worry about that. Leave everything and follow me. I mean, listen, mate, if that's not the awakening of the hero's journey, I don't know what is. What about Moses' story? You want to talk about the transformation of a man over the course of his life. He's used for a purpose for others. He fails, deals with his own shame, has to go to the wilderness and be remade, is called back out of his hiding. Joshua, the life of David, Paul, Peter. Peter goes from being a fisherman in a tiny village over the most breathtaking journey of transformation, travel, and adventure, where his life ends being crucified upside down in Rome. I ask Peter when he's hanging upside down, how was your life, mate? And he's not going to say, I suppose it was okay, it was boring. He's going to say, I did not know that when Jesus said, I will upgrade your vision, I'll upgrade your vision from fish to men, that it would be this good. Paul's life. Look at Paul. He's like, I spent a night and day at the open sea. I've been beaten. If we're following Jesus well, it will be a life of adventure. I say to our church all the time, if you're bored with your faith, I promise you God is bored with your faith too. And I think he's just waiting for someone to say, what else do you have? And he says, fantastic, let's go. So yeah, I think it is, without any hype, it is an invitation to the life that we long for. And that's why so many men, you look at St. Francis of Assisi, so many young men drowning in hedonism or pleasure. When they get a vision of Christ, they take all that passion for hedonism and redirect it towards the kingdom, and they become saints. And that's what God does. He takes our desire for significance, he takes our ambition, he takes our passion, and he redirects it in the way of Jesus, towards the way of life. So yeah, preach Jesus and another life will emerge in the midst of a boring, empty, late modern faith.
Jon Tyson's call to present Christian faith as a daring calling and an adventure to men is not unprecedented. For decades, the Promise Keepers men's movement had brought men in the USA together under a similar banner, and John Eldridge's book and Bible study series, Wild at Heart, became hugely popular in evangelical men's ministries.
Why is it that the desires that we find deep in our hearts are so far from the life that we find ourselves living? There was a heart that we had as a boy, filled with wonder and dreams of battle, and adventure, beauty. And somewhere in the process of boy to man, most of us lose heart. And in order to find the life that we are still looking for, we have to go back. we have to get those lost parts of our heart back.
But with the revival of interest in more muscular forms of men's ministry focused on adventure, structure, challenge, and responsibility, is there also a danger of falling into stereotypes and unhelpful theology regarding men and women? Theologian Lucy Peppiatt is principal of Westminster Theological Centre in the UK. She's the author of books including Rediscovering Scripture's Vision for Women, arguing for the full inclusion of women in church leadership. She's told me why she believes we don't need to play off men against women in the church, but can still acknowledge the particular gifts and characteristics that men bring, something she's learned as the mother of 4 sons.
My sons are amazing with women. They're amazing husbands. They have all come in their own way to own really what I would call a feminist view of the world. And so I'd get very cross and defensive if they would tell me that their own, young women around them would sort of have a go at them. And I think, well, they're not the enemy. They are really not the enemy. So pick somebody else. And so, I feel I've been slightly on both sides and have found myself defending men in multiple situations because I've had such positive experience of living and working with them, and like you say, having role models. I've had no female mentors, none. So yeah, they're not the enemy in my world. But again, let's not obscure the fact. And I hate using sort of hackneyed phrases, but for want of a better way of putting it, male dominance or patriarchy has had a hugely detrimental effect on women for a very long time. And so we've got to, all of us, and this is what I think is a Christian pursuit, those of us who've put our faith in Jesus understand the difference that he makes and that the Holy Spirit can make in relationships, is to work towards reconciliation and mutual empowerment, and which is going to be good for all of us.
Seeing that most church congregations comprise more women than men, some have argued that the church is too feminized. I asked Lucy how she responds to those who advocate for a John Eldredge-style vision of a battle to fight, an adventure to live, and a beauty to rescue in order to attract men.
I don't really like the route of men are inherently like this, they all love competition, they have to have something to conquer, they have, all the sort of John Eldredge thing. Therefore, if you put that in front of them, they'll respond to it and it will give them a sense of purpose and identity, and that will solve all your problems. And conversely, women are always like XXXX. The Bible's very silent on how we're different. So I kind of hold to that men and women are different. I'm slightly reticent on how they're different. I think there are things that you can make some generalizations, and women tend to have some tolerances for certain things that men don't have. So, for instance, my theory about why there are more women in church often is that women seem to be better at bonding, making friendships, with other women, and that seems to be something they can do easily in church settings, and men find that harder. And so, I think that often many people are a little bit bored in church, but women have good friends there. So that will keep them going, so they'll have a tolerance for sitting through the same kind of thing, slightly dull sermon, worship that goes on too long. It's not that women are sitting there thinking, oh, this is perfect. It's just they're sitting there going, oh, it's great because I get to see my mates. And, and if you've got a group of friends or you've got kids or whatever. Whereas for the man, it's like sit around or stand awkwardly afterwards having coffee with your hands in your pockets, and what am I going to talk about? I'd rather go home and watch something, do whatever, or get a job done. So there's that kind of thing operating.
In my own experience, I have seen men respond disproportionately strongly, on average, to apologetics and evidential arguments than women. I asked Lucy what she makes of the fact that it is seeking men who seem to be the main demographic being drawn towards faith by public intellectuals like Peterson, Pajot, and Bishop Barron.
I think that there is something there. So that's where I see something that's really needed. And I would say it's as needed for women as it is for men, but that women will tolerate living without it for longer. That's my theory. And having brought up 4 boys, I realized as they were growing up that they had extremely good questions from very young age, much younger than people think. And none of my children particularly wanted to go to a youth group at the age of 14 where people were just playing games. And we then began to have some very in-depth theological conversation around our dinner table. And I know that sounds a bit nerdy and a bit odd, but honestly, that's true. And because they had the questions, they brought the questions. My husband is a Bible scholar, and I was doing theology, and we all just often would sit and talk about the Bible, talk about God, answer their questions, tell them if we couldn't answer their questions. And I think that young men and actually young women are patronized, but women, this is what I keep saying, women will have a tolerance for it, girls will have a tolerance for it, and boys won't. And so, but when you get the girls to realize, oh no, you can join in this too, then of course they come alive.
I think one of the reasons that the church often finds the conversation on men difficult is because masculinity itself is such a contested term. It's been maligned by progressive culture on the one hand, but appropriated in unhealthy ways by the red pill bros on the other end of the spectrum. It's important to be wary of falling into lazy stereotypes. But at the same time, it's also clear that men are physically and psychologically different from women on average. And as more and more young men, the missing generation in so many churches, find their way back to faith, we need a better story of what it means to be a man. I sat down with Dr. Anthony Bradley to talk about his own work mentoring young men, and began by asking Anthony for a biblical definition of masculinity.
Masculinity is using your power and your presence in your creativity and all that God has made you to be and to do for the benefit of other people. It's a way of thinking about masculinity as loving your neighbor. And what's interesting is that it's not set against femininity. I think that's a wrong way to think about what it means to be masculine. What the Bible does is it frames masculinity in terms of maturity. So when I was a child, I thought as a child. We talk about being on spiritual milk versus meat. Jesus grew in wisdom and stature before God and men. So the trajectory is maturity. And so in the conferences that I do and the way that I speak to young lads, I'm thinking, hey, what is it about the way God has made you that he wants to mature you to be, as it says in 1 John 2:14, right? A strong, you've overcome the evil one, and the word of God abides in you. You are strong. This is what it means to be masculine, is to use all of the attributes that God has given us for the benefit of those around us. And that's where we both find life and give life. It's on the very model of Christ himself, who came to serve, not to be served. And this is where I think the negative masculinity narrative says the opposite. They say that your masculinity is here for you to be served. And the Christian model is where your masculinity is here so that you can serve others. And that is where you find an enduring, eternal sense of meaning and purpose and identity.
You've obviously been involved in helping to mentor young men and to encourage others to do that. Very often people who maybe didn't grow up with a strong father figure in their life. How important has that been in the kind of the journey of young people that you've seen, young men especially? And do you think the church can be a place where those missing father figures can be supplied from?
Absolutely. I think one of the reasons that so many young lads are drawn to sport is that it provides a community of mentorship and father figures in the form of coaches, boxing coaches. I think this is why MMA is so popular. Jiu-jitsu is growing in popularity. Of course, football has always been popular, but they want to have relationships with coaches. And what's in one sense so tragic is that outside of the world of sport, there's not a lot of opportunity for men to be coached, to be developed, to have older men in their lives. And so what we have an army of men in churches who could be doing this. Young men are starving. I mean, they are hurting for older men to invest in them. And this is one of the reasons why so many young lads end up going down the wrong path, because it seems, unfortunately, that so many of the men that are willing to do this are not the greatest men. You see this in housing estates. Those men want to invest. Some of them aren't the best men. Gangs, drugs, criminals want to invest. But outside of that, in sport, there's not a lot of that. So this is really, really vital, and there's a yearning for that. And if men in churches were just willing to commit to I would say 5 or 6 hours a month, maybe an hour a week of just meeting with a young lad and just talking about life over a meal, or doing something together, like going for a walk, playing golf, playing tennis, doing something, is having conversations, it would meet those sorts of needs in pretty profound ways.
I asked Anthony for an example of where he had seen the transformational effect of mentoring.
A number of years ago, I encountered a young man whose father was in prison for being a drug dealer, and he was a teenage lad, 15 years old, and he was selling drugs just like his father. And what did I do? I took him to lunch once a week. He had a teacher who was interested in trying to find a mentor because she realized that he was really smart. And through my church, we are at the same church, she was asking around, hey, were there any guys who would hang out with this teenage lad? And I said, I'll do it. I like to eat. And I can eat with anybody, and teenagers also like to eat. So we just simply went to lunch. And over time, that going to lunch also was an invitation to go to church. That invitation to church was an open opportunity to see that I was not the only man like myself. Blew his mind. And that opened him up to wanting to be a member of a church, wanting to see himself as a part of a church. In fact, it actually opened him up to wanting to do other things, to have a business, to be stable economically, to get married, to take he had a child outside of marriage, to be a good father, to be a provider, right? But it all came through this relationship of me just showing him the world, and a world that was different than the one he experienced. And it didn't require or it didn't demand much of me at all, but just me taking him to these places. And I'm happy to say that I've been walking with this former young lad. He's now in his 30s, but he's doing great. He's a great father. He's now selling real estate and very involved and wants to mentor young men himself and things like that. So I've just seen over the years that just a little investment does go a really, really long way, and people will be surprised the outcomes in someone's life that they can have just by being present and loving them well.
as young men continue to seek wisdom and guidance from mentors, I think we'll see more and more of them wandering into our churches looking for it. So how can churches respond? Glen Scrivener says it doesn't need to be complicated. He told me about one young man who recently showed up in church having just bought a Bible out of the blue. The activity they decided to undertake was disarmingly simple.
This guy had all sorts of questions about Genesis, and he wasn't put off by the King James language. He wasn't put off by how ancient the text felt to him. He wasn't put off by coming to church, actually. What he did not need was an evangelistic event that the church could put on that was 17 steps removed from an encounter with the scriptures. In fact, he would not want to come to the pub quiz where the evangelist gets up in at the end of round 3 and invites people to church. He wouldn't come to that. He wouldn't go to the five-a-side football tournaments where some poor evangelist has to get up at halftime and explain about the gospel. He would jump in with both feet to something that's deep and rich and old and weird and ancient and embodied and challenging. And so what I'm inviting him to is, well, here's a whole bunch of guys, and we're going to go for a walk around. We're quite near the Seven Sisters where we are in Eastbourne. We're going to go for a ramble with a ramble, okay? A ramble chat on a rambling walk, shoulder to shoulder, talking about life. And I think this guy is emblematic of loads of guys that I am meeting. If you want to do intentional discipleship with young guys, especially who are showing up, then I would recommend what we used to do and call it men's ministry. That is kind of now our evangelism. And you don't have to tweak it very much. And you don't have to add a whole lot of bells and whistles and add a whole lot of gimmicks to it. What you just need to do is gather together and get real with one another and have a number of Christians who are perhaps longer in the tooth, who've been around the block a few times, who have followed Jesus and can share the deep, rich, weird wisdom of the scriptures with one another. I think that's where discipleship is really happening, but it's also where evangelism is really happening, because I really think that distinction between evangelism and discipleship is fortunately being loosened. Because I think we're recognizing that discipleship is just evangelizing Christians, and evangelism is just discipling non-Christians. And I think we're in a very healthy moment when the wall between evangelism and discipleship is starting to break down.
In these past 2 episodes, we've explored the roots of the modern male identity crisis. We've been alerted to the fact that there are some false gods and unhelpful actors out there trying to supply men with a sense of identity based on sex, wealth, and power. But for the men who are coming back to church in this surprising rebirth movement, I can't think of a better vision of masculinity than that represented by a man who was never married or had sex, lived a life of relative poverty, and refused power for the pursuit of domination, but instead chose to serve and become a sacrifice for many. Jon Tyson explains just why Jesus is the best model men could hope to emulate.
You resemble what you revere for ruin or restoration. So whatever you set your eye on, slowly over the course of time, forms your vision of what you should be. The Bible's message is fix your eyes on Jesus. This is a message for men. Fix your eyes on Jesus. So when we ask the question, how did Jesus respond as a man? So number one, how did Jesus treat women? Jesus' treatment of women is so breathtaking and spectacular. The woman at the well, he dignifies her, doesn't shame her. The woman caught in adultery, he drives a wedge between the accuser and the grace of God so a conversation can produce restoration in her life. I think about that scene of the sinful woman. She's a prostitute, sex worker, willing to go into the house of a Pharisee. You want to talk about a shame-filled environment. You think about all of her interactions with men, how she's been treated, touched, and held. And in her life, who is a safe man? And she hears a rumor of Christ, and she's willing to go to the Pharisee's house and wash his feet with her hair and tears, and Jesus rebukes the Pharisee and defends her. What sort of environment did Christ create for women when they viewed him like that? And so the answer is we've got to produce a vision of men that dignify and do not abuse women. So that's step number one. We treat women differently because Jesus treated women differently. Number two, we kind of, I think, sometimes judge this. The disciples were always fighting who's going to be the greatest. Okay, so we always judge that, like, look at them, they're so arrogant. I see it just slightly differently. I believe Jesus had a capacity to awaken a desire for greatness in people. Whoever believed in these fishermen? Nobody. Their lives were doomed to be small, local, little lives. If Jesus hadn't showed up, we never would have heard of the disciples. But Jesus made them believe that something great could happen with their lives. Now, he has to redirect it and redefine it, but he had the capacity to awaken things. Jesus' sense of differentiation. Mark 10 tells us, looking at him, he loved him, the rich young ruler, and he sent him away. So Jesus has the capacity to love and care, but still not lower his standards. He's so secure in himself as a Messiah, he can love without lowering his standards. Jesus' love for children. He doesn't see them as a commodity or irrelevant. He rebukes his missional disciples and says there's a place for them. So again, how we saw individuals, making space for grace in the midst of a shame-based culture. When you present Jesus like that and you say to men, excuse me, gentlemen, this is your destiny. You've been predestined to be conformed to become like this man. That's how you don't produce stereotypes. You produce godliness. So the answer is, what is masculinity? Well, masculinity is men becoming like Jesus, fully integrated, emotionally attuned, still with strength and courage to confront hypocrisy. And that's why our message is we don't preach ourselves, but Christ as Lord. Our message is not a form of cultural masculinity, but a rich biblical Christianity where we die to ourselves so that Christ's life can be formed through us where we show up.
You guys, I just found the most incredible Mother's Day gift. It's called Goldbelly. Goldbelly is this amazing site where you can get the most iconic foods from restaurants all across the U.S., shipped anywhere in the country for free in time for Mother's Day. We're talking cakes from Ina Garten and Martha Stewart, Magnolia Bakery's famous banana pudding, and New York bagel brunches. Make Mother's Day perfect with Goldbelly.com and get 20% off your first order with promo code MOM. That's Goldbelly.com, promo code MOM.
Halliday presents, in the red corner, the undisputed, undefeated Weed Whacker Guy. Champion of hurling grass and pollen everywhere. And in the blue corner, the challenger, extra strength Halliday. Eye drops that work all day to prevent the release of histamines that cause itchy allergy eyes. And the winner by knockout is Halliday. Halliday, bring it on.
At Sephora, we've got what you want because you're obsessed with your skin and we're obsessed with what it needs. Sephora has the best products to help you get beautiful, glowing, radiant skin. With an extensive, inclusive range of results-driven formulas and in-store beauty advisors to help you find exactly which are right for you, the best skincare is only at Sephora. Sephora, for all your skincare.
I'm aware that there are many complex factors in the reasons why men are showing a renewed interest in Christianity: cultural, existential, and political. As we explored in a previous episode about the recent vibe shift, the same factors that put Donald Trump back in the White House are also contributing to men showing up in church again. But whatever the reasons men are coming back to church for, I'm confident that when they meet the real Jesus, they won't be left the same. That's why I want to end this episode by sharing the story of Stu Fhulendorf. Today, he's a church pastor in Colorado, but for much of his life, he chased the gods of money, career, cars, and alcohol as a high-flying business executive. The God of the Bible had never been on his agenda.
Yeah, I did not grow up in a house that was really a Christian household. Fairly normal, non-Christian family that was functioning until we found out that my mom found out that my father was having an affair with another woman. When my father moved out for the final time, it was a very dramatic moment in my life. And in fact, my mom was devastated. My dad was moving out, and yeah, it had a big impact in my life. Even when they tried to reconcile, it didn't go well.
Losing his dad from the family home led to Stu's determination to become a self-made man.
So I guess you could say I was my own God. I was on the throne. It was me who I turned to. And it seemed like I was the only one that I could depend on in my life, the people, places, and things. And I think that's fairly common often with young people when their parents get divorced. Well, they can often act out in a very unhealthy way, and I did later. But I really turned to myself and my own accomplishments and my own self-sufficiency.
Stu says he never had time for anyone who was religious.
I just thought it was people who needed a crutch. I wasn't critical at that point in my life. Now later I got critical, and I was becoming an arguing atheist, embracing Christopher Hitchens and people like that in my 30s. But I just thought that they were people who were leaning on a crutch in their own insecurities, and that's how I felt about them.
Working hard, Stu also partied hard, but discovering alcohol as a student led to a lifelong relationship with drink.
Part of my story is that I became more and more in my life a functional and then dysfunctional alcoholic. Actually met my wife, Trish. I actually met her at a nightclub in downtown Denver, which was apropos. My wife grew up Roman Catholic and didn't have a relationship with the Lord, and I grew up nothing. And so I remember drinking Jack Daniels, and I met her at Basins Up bar, the Freddie Hinchy band playing in Denver some 37 years ago. And then we were married 11 months after we met. And our life started from that point forward. Neither one of us Christians. And both of us set off. My wife at the time was an aerospace engineer for a company in Denver, Martin Marietta. And I was a school teacher and was working in a bar in the evenings.
Stu embarked on a business career, eventually becoming involved in a multi-million-dollar tech startup.
The CEO, the founder, and other executives in the company were heavy drinkers, and so I fit right in. And so we would actually go to the bar late at night, and my son was born in 1990 and my daughter in 1992, so I'm a father of young children, and we would literally write business plans on the back of cocktail napkins until about 10 o'clock. So I fit right in. These guys were drinkers, and it was a dynamic time in technology because the internet hadn't even really started until about 94. So again, it was a very dynamic time period to be in technology.
Success followed. So did Stu's thoughts ever turn towards God?
Well, no, there were thoughts of God, and my God was my green, brand new Jaguar car that I bought from England, and my house that I bought on the golf course, and the mahogany bar that I built in my basement of my new house. Oh, I had gods, all right, but those were my gods, and I was getting everything that I wanted. And then by the time the mid 90s rolled around, we got a new CEO, and we actually in 1996 were named the #1 public company in Colorado.
But the drinking and work schedule was affecting Stu's relationship with Trish.
I think our marriage was not good, for one thing. Again, I was spending 80 hours a week at work. I was drinking a lot. She could sense that I was becoming more and more argumentative in terms of just, and angry because I was getting what I thought I wanted and I wasn't satisfied. And so it was creating stress on our relationship. Well, 1996, 97 is where my wife became a Christian, gave her life to the Lord. God picked her up out of the miry depths, and she fell in love with Jesus. And so that was like 1997. And and so from that point forward, it was about another 9 years of being unequally yoked with a pagan atheist husband, which was a very difficult time period for us.
Stu describes how he reacted to his wife's conversion.
She was very secretive at first, and then I thought she was a wackadoo and a Bible thumper and a Jesus freak. And I told her so. And so she would read the Bible, and when I would walk in, she would kind of cover up the Bible. But it was that kind of a story where my wife would keep her faith private as much as she could, though. I could see she was changing. She was becoming happier, more content, more joyful. And meanwhile, the more and more stuff I got, the more and more stuff I bought, the more and more I wanted to drink and fill the empty hole in my heart. And I wasn't happy, even though I was getting everything I thought I wanted.
Gradually, Stu abandoned his attempts to persuade his wife out of her newfound faith.
I was arguing, but I was seeing my wife's life transform, where literally she was able to accept things I was unable to accept. She was able to be surrendered at a level I was totally unable to even understand. She had a joy and happiness and contentment in her life, regardless of what we had, whether I had a lot or I lost things. That her whole identity wasn't residing in those things like mine was. My identity was.
When Trish began attending a new church, she persuaded Stu to come along. That Sunday, the preacher directed his message specifically at the gods of sex, money, and success that dominate many men's lives. Stu felt convicted.
I remember sitting there thinking, oh, really? I thought I was God. And I felt really angry at him, and then I could not wait to go back to church the next week. So that's kind of how it worked for me. So me, the convicting and correcting part was an incredibly important aspect of my Christian walk. Anybody who thinks it's all about somebody getting up there smiling and saying they love you, I can attest to you that for many people, men and women, that doesn't do it, because it's not compelling, and it's not preaching the entirety of the gospel. I went to church quite a bit for the next 3 years, and I found my heart softening. And though I was still an arguing atheist, I found that people were able to argue my position against my position in a way that was completely effective. And I realized how sort of feckless and moronic a lot of my views were becoming, but I still would not call myself a Christian at all. But Trish was seeing some encouragement in fact, one time I was sitting next to her at a stop sign, and I said, I feel my heart softening, and she didn't even respond, because she knew if she responded too positively, it would turn me off. But yeah, I could feel my heart starting to soften.
Stu's business dealings continued to flourish, and in 2006, he flew to London for an IPO, an initial public offering, with investment bankers that would send his company public, earning millions for him and his business partners. He recalls with special clarity one moment during the boozy business trip.
I drank like a bottle of wine by myself. I was a functional alcoholic and all the rest of it. And we were walking down Market Street in London. One of the investment bankers said, see, look up in that window, there's a yellow star. That's where Marx wrote his manifesto to the Labour Party. And one of the guys said, Marx had one thing right, that religion is the opiate of the masses. And everybody kind of chuckled, said, that's right. And I said, yeah, that's right as well. Well, we went back to the Savoy Hotel where we were staying in London. And somebody asked me if I wanted to go to the bar to have a drink. I said, not tonight. So I went up to the room at the Savoy Hotel. And what hit me was, it's obviously the Holy Spirit. What hit me was the opiate of the mass. That's true. And then I thought, what would the world be like without Jesus? That's what hit me. It's just like yesterday for me. It was December 7th, 2006. And it was, yes, the world is broken. Yes, I've heard this concept of depravity. Yes, there's sin all over the place. But what would the world be like without Jesus? And I just felt that the wave came over me, started sobbing, pools of snot and tears, and was saved. And so basically wept that whole night in the hotel room, kind of on my back and on my stomach on the floor, and saying, what a rebel I've been. I've had this all wrong. And yeah, came to Christ that night.
Stu had become a Christian, but Stu's alcoholism meant that following Christ was not going to be easy.
We got through the IPO, was priced at a level, and then became the hottest flowing tech IPO in 5 years in America. And then we flew back on a private G10 plane. I drank about 4 or 5 double gins on the rocks, and we went to an IPO party, and I got up and gave a big roaring speech and got so drunk at the party that Trish got disgusted and had to drive me home after the IPO private party. The vast majority of people that I run into in pastoring and in salvations after they're 20-something years old, when they get saved, it is pick up your cross, follow me, and understand that it's in the fire that God will make the gold. And that's exactly what happened with me. The gospel really entails an understanding of how decrepit, how depraved, and how broken we really are as people, and how God's grace and mercy moves into the lives of wholly unrighteous people. No one's righteous, no, not one. No one seeks for God. And that he moves into that space. And then when we understand the darkness of what we're truly born into, then the magnificence of the grace and mercy and receiving that undeserving gift of faith that only God gives can really move in. So I think one of the issues we were seeing in the American church, not at all churches, but at many of them, is we love to talk about the light, but we don't teach the darkness so people understand what the light is even shining into.
Despite his new faith, Stu was unable to conquer his alcohol addiction. When one business crisis after another led to litigation and a painful separation from his tech company, Stu, unwisely in retrospect, invested in a wine business instead. But things eventually came to a head.
So the last thing that happened is I was being sued and losing everything and all the rest of it is I went on about a 5-day bender with Trish on vacation in Colorado while I was in Seattle. And when she got back, I was almost dead. I was drank for the whole 5 days. She had somebody come over and try to get me. I told them to get lost. And so she took me to the hospital and I blew about 0.4, which 0.45 is death, and looked at her and said, I need to get help. And I also told her, I said, I cannot glorify God and be a drunk, and I need help. We called around, and 2 days later I got into rehab. And I spent 28 days in alcohol rehab, and it was the greatest 28 days. I couldn't believe I could actually get through 28 days sober. And I when I checked in, they said, you can't have your Bible because it was a secular rehab. And I said, no Bible, no me. And they said, no, okay, you can have your Bible. And after about 5 days of detox and all the rest of that, then every 5:30 in the morning, I got up, I was reading my Bible. I had people starting to join me. Janie, I think, came up, and she was a nurse and she was hooked on opioids. And she said, can you tell me about this? I noticed you're studying the Bible. I said, yeah. She said, can you tell me about this Jesus guy? And I'm thinking, I'm just in here trying to get sober. But yeah, you can join me. And then a couple others. Well, Trish started showing up after a week to the family Sunday. And I told her, I said, there aren't any Bibles in here, but I got a bunch of people joining me. So I said, next time you show up, can you bring Bibles and we can smuggle them into rehab? So she's like, absolutely. So the next week, for the next 3 weeks, she would bring Bibles on Sunday to the family day, and we would smuggle Bibles into rehab. At the end, I had 19 people out of the 90 joining me for Bible study out of the 90. And I was on fire, and I thought, I am never going to drink again. This is awesome. And I got out of rehab, and within a week, I was drinking again. It was devastating. We owned a wine distributorship, so I called my business partner, and I said, I have $1.8 million in this, and I'm walking away from it. I cannot be in the wine business and be sober. And he got me out, and I walked away. And and then it was December, I can't remember, December 3rd of 2010, I had my last drink.
A new start led to a new set of priorities, working with a Christian addiction recovery ministry and discovering a gift for Bible teaching. Stu no longer wanted to work 60 to 80-hour weeks while neglecting his family. In his late 40s, and with Trish's blessing, Stu entered seminary and trained to become a pastor, eventually leading a small church plant which has since grown to hundreds in attendance.
And I tell our congregation as an example that I'm not a pastor because I love them. I'm a pastor because I love Jesus. And I love them because Christ loved us first. And if it wasn't for that, I couldn't do this for 2 weeks because most of the people in my congregation drive me crazy, like I drive them crazy. But it's actually in those feelings of discontentment about pursuing the things of this world, regardless of whether they're green Jaguars or houses on the golf course or careers and strong balance sheets and millions of dollars, or even just being homeless. That joy and contentment doesn't come from circumstance, or the things that we own. In fact, if anything in America, things that we own can actually pull us away from God. The thing that really gives us contentment and joy and true satisfaction is a relationship with Jesus, and to know that Jesus died for you, that Jesus is still alive, and that Jesus will come again, and that what we experience in this world, yes, there's always going to be an element of discontentment, because true shalom doesn't really come until we're actually in full relationship, in vertical relationship with Jesus Christ.
In a world where men are struggling to find identity, there are plenty of false idols ready to offer a counterfeit sense of purpose. Stu's surprising rebirth story saw him bow to many of them before discovering the true identity he had been searching for.
We all worship something. And for me, the worship was myself, the worship was booze, the worship was money, the worship was career, the worship was being a helicopter dad for my son. I had all kinds of gods. The problem is that they're all false idols, and there's only one that won't let you down, and it's Jesus. So I can't honestly look back and sit now and say, oh, I didn't really see that I had a need for God. Oh, I saw I had a need for God. The problem is that, I filled up that empty hole in my heart with everything except for the true Lord, which is what then addiction or alcoholism or drug addiction or sin in general is, which is filling that empty hole in our heart with something that's counterfeit. And once we understand that, we can get healthier and get sober and understand that there's only one worth worshiping.
You can read Stu Fhulendorf's story in his book, Wall Street to the Well, a story of transformation from fortune to faith. Thanks to Jana Harmon for recording Stu's story. You can find it in full at the Ex-Skeptic podcast. I believe that many more men like Stu are waking up to realize that the world they've been sold and the gods they've invested their life in aren't working out. I think it's borne out by the surprising influx of meaning-seeking young men finding their way into church today. Whatever's motivating them to explore faith for the first time, my hope and prayer is that the church will meet this surprising rebirth with a true picture of masculine identity found in the God who became a man, Jesus. You've been listening to The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God with me, Justin Brierley, continuing to tell the story of why many secular 21st century people are considering Christianity again. As ever, please do rate and review the podcast and share it with others. This podcast is also a book. You can read chapter 1 for free when you subscribe to my newsletter. And if you'd like to help me reach many more people with Thinking Faith, please consider becoming a monthly supporter of my work. Silver supporters get early access to new episodes, as well as bonus content. In fact, as we're in the season of Easter, we've just released my full video interview with New Testament scholar Jeremiah J. Johnston on his book, Body of Proof, the 7 best reasons to believe in the resurrection of Jesus and why it matters today. That's exclusively available to monthly supporters. In addition, Gold supporters also get signed copies of my books and a monthly catch-up call with me. The links are with the show notes. Coming up next time, is it symbolism all the way down, or does it have a kind of material, historical bedrock?
Our world has been transformed by Christ completely, utterly. We live in that world. We live in that story. If we deny the event of the incarnation, then we are undermining everything that we care about.
Orthodox thinker and icon carver Jonathan Pageau talks to me about atheism, symbolism, resurrection, and why his friend Jordan Peterson has been at the leading edge of the surprising rebirth phenomenon. But don't forget, you can listen to or watch that episode right now when you become a silver or gold supporter. And again, right now, you'll also get access to a bonus video of Jeremiah J. Johnston and I talking about the evidence for the resurrection. Again, the links to support are with the show notes, where you can also find links to all today's guests and archive material. The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God is a production of Think Faith in partnership with Genexus and the Jerusalem Trust. Editing assistance by Isaac Simmons. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.
Imagine a world-class graduate education that's accessible, flexible, and designed for career impact. That's Harvard Extension School, Build actionable knowledge and skills in challenging online classes taught by Harvard faculty and industry experts. Explore new opportunities and expand your network with high-achieving professionals from around the world. Part-time learning, real-world impact. This is Harvard on your terms. Learn more at extension.harvard.edu/Spotify.
This podcast is supported by Progressive, a leader in RV insurance. RVs are for sharing adventures with family, friends, and even your pets. So if you bring your cats and dogs along for the ride, you'll want Progressive RV insurance. They protect your cats and dogs like family by offering up to $1,000 in optional coverage for vet bills in case of an RV accident, making it a great companion for the responsible pet owner who loves to travel. See Progressive's other benefits and more when you quote RV insurance at Progressive.com today. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Pet injury is an additional coverage and subject to policy terms.
The Christian faith is not going away in postmodern Western culture, but actually has the potential to grow exponentially again in our time. That was how one reviewer was left feeling after reading the book that this podcast is based on. Why not grab yourself a copy of The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God and find out why new atheism grew old and secular thinkers are considering Christianity again? You can even purchase a signed copy exclusively from my website. Just go to the book link with the podcast info.